Hello, folks, and welcome to the 11th episode of From the Marginlands. I'm Arti Kumar Rao.
Hello, I'm Prem and yeah, this is the 11th episode, and I was like, okay, we've done almost 6 months worth of this. I never thought we would get that far.
Yes, that's true. And today we are talking restoration of ecosystems. And for that, we have somebody I consider a mentor, having met Pradip Krishen in 2013 when I first went to the desert and learned a whole lot from him, which was basically, we used to go walking on the dunes in the desert, and I learned how to observe the very minute and pay attention to detail from Pradeep, who is just amazing at reading landscapes. So, a little bit more about him. He used to be a filmmaker, and you might have heard of Masi Sahib and Electric Moon, and In Which Annie Gives, those ones, which I think all of them won awards and
The
national
national
awards.
level, yeah.
And so, yeah, and then he transitioned after that to writing books where he wrote the amazing Trees of Delhi, a field guide. And then what I consider one of the best field guides coming out of India, the jungle trees of central India. And in between that, he started doing restoration of desert ecosystems and worked on recreating what Rao Jodha Park, which is at the foothills, at the foot of Mehrangarh Fort in Jodhpur, must have looked like long years ago before the Prosopis juliflora came in. Absolutely fantastic job doing that. Then he went on to Kishanbagh in Jaipur, and in between all of that, there were other little ones that he restored. And restoration, as a contrast to just tree planting or afforestation, they are distinct things, and we talk about that and we delve deeper into that in a wide-ranging conversation coming up right now.
Yeah. And I remember I met him in 2014 at Mehrangarh,
That's right.
and more than anything else, what you realize about him is the enthusiasm he brings to it. It's not this overt thing, but you spend about 10 minutes talking to him, and you realize that the man is full of this of what is possible, what can be done, and he meets a fellow traveler, he just lights up.
Yeah, and
Such a
sheer wonder at very
yeah,
small things.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which seems to be part of the DNA of most. I hate to use the word because it's become so overused, abused, but naturalists or environmentalists. But yeah,
Yep.
for want
I
of a
think he
better word.
calls himself the native gardener or something like that, which is
Hmm.
exactly what he is, because he
Yeah,
is a big proponent of native plants and trees and grasses and so on, things that belong in the landscape and do not need um, mollycoddling.
right. So, without further ado, let's talk to Pradeep.
Great.
Okay.
Uh, Welcome, Pradeep Krishan. It's lovely to have you here on this 11th episode. And this is, I think, going to be a rambling, wide ranging, you know, lot of chitter chatter kind of episode, because we're going to cover a lot of ground.
And thank you for taking the time, Pradeep. It's wonderful. We wanted to start by exploring your personal journey. You were in Panchmari shooting for Electric Moon when something shifted in your mindset, right? What actually happened?
No, it didn't really have anything to do with Electric Moon or being in Pachmari at
Hmm.
that time. But so I was shooting Electric Moon in 1990
Hmm.
and just loved the jungle there, loved being there, loved the Mahadev Hills, is what they're called. And I went back because I was able to buy a tiny plot of land in 1994, 1993 perhaps.
Mhm.
So long after we'd stopped making the film. And while I was making the film, while I was making the house, with an architect friend, we started doing these long rambling walks in the jungle
Mm.
and just started loving it. And we had a forester neighbor, somebody he was still in the forest service at that time. He would sometimes join us and he would begin to interpret the jungle for us. And he would say, "Do you know what that tree is?" I'd say, "No." And he said, "Well, it's called Sormida febrifuga." And we said, "Really? Say that again slowly." And we started calling them Latin walks. We do these Latin walks with Nishikant. And my architect friend Golak and I said, "Hey, come on, let's try and get to know all the trees in this jungle
Mhm.
in the year or year and a half we're going to spend making the house. Just like a hobby, very much like birds, bird watching or bird spotting." And we reckon there were about 100 species of trees in that neck of the woods. So it seemed doable. And we started. So we do these walks very often. We discover new trees. We start to feel the bark. We try and get familiar with the characters of the tree, of the different trees. And we didn't actually get to 100. We must have got to about 40 or 45 in that period when we were building the house. But it was great fun. It was great fun getting to know the jungle.
Mhm.
And during this time, I think 4 or 5 months into the exploration of trees, I bought my first flora, which was a very daunting thing because it used botanical terminology that I wasn't familiar with. And you had to go to the glossary to understand what all these terms like terit meant. And that was fun. And I remember putting a little blue dot on every tree in the book. The book was about all the flora. So it had climbers, lianas, bushes, grasses, herbs. And I thought, there's no way I can get to know all of this. So let me just isolate the trees from everything else. I put a little blue dot next to the names of all the trees so that my eye only went to the blue dots and then read about the trees. I also got interested in woods at the same time because I had to
Mhm.
buy some timber for the house we were building, and there's no way I could afford to buy teak, which is the standard wood that you get for building a house. Teak was about 1,500 rupees a cubic foot at that time
Wow.
in 93, 94. And I asked my forester friend, I said, is there a way to get cheaper timber for the house? And he said, you can try and find out what timber is used for. And it so happened that the flora I bought, which was by this German forester called Dietrich Brandes, written in the 19th century, was full of information about every single timber that is used in this area, and what it's
Mhm.
used for, and what the specific gravity is, and what its nail holding strength. I mean, too much information almost, but really useful. So we found 10 woods.
Mm.
No, we found 12 woods, 12 kinds of timbers that I said, we could probably try and get from a forest depot. And when you're buying wood from a forest depot, it's very interesting because you have to go through a contractor. And forest depots basically have one section which is what they call the good woods, which is, teak and shisham and some other woods. And then you have what they call miscellaneous woods, the rest, which is almost like firewoods. And all the woods I had chosen were all in the miscellaneous category.
Mhm.
So we told the contractor, and he looked at us as if we were a bit crazy. And he said, "Well, if that's what you want, I'll look for them." And there's no way we could have told what woods they were because they're in these miscellaneous bundles, and there's no tags or names. So it's really the contractor's experience and skill at recognizing the bark and telling us this is giria and this is that and this is that.
Mhm.
So anyway, we trusted him and we came back with all the 10 woods that we wanted, plus a lot of other woods that were parts of the bundle. And the total amount of wood that we bought, the average price was about 140 rupees a cubic foot. So it was less than a tenth as expensive. We were very happy. But that started me also on my journey of getting to know woods and working with woods. And so we used all these woods for everything to do with the house. And I just completely fell in love with them. So I was looking at living trees. but
Was
also
that when you also started working with wood, like making woodworking, basically?
a little bit. I was learning how to carve. I was nicking myself on my hands and getting injured all over the place. But yeah, it was the first time I was using woodworking tools.
Mm.
And I've not been very consistent with it, but I've had a lot of fun with it. It's been yeah. I did things with carving, trying to carve wood. So a lot of the time while my architect was busy, instructing workers what to do, and I didn't have a lot to do except to sort of stand back and watch what was happening. I started carving and working with wood smelting. So anyway, when we finished the house, and I got a bit involved with trying to make an ecological plan for Pachmari. I was invited by virtue of just being a citizen of Pachmari to a development plan meeting, and I said, "Gosh, I mean, there's so much that can be done for this little town." There was a beautiful town at the edge of the jungle with a tiny population, and it hadn't been spoilt like all the other hill stations of India. And the more I read about what's called integrated conservation planning, which was the new way of dealing with development planning, I thought, gosh, wouldn't it be wonderful to get involved with planning and looking at every sector of public life. You're looking at roads and transport, you're looking at livelihoods, you're looking at the dwelling units, you're looking at electricity, you're looking at drinking water, everything. And it's a little bit like playing God, where you're trying to make decisions about things, and then you're trying to integrate them so they're not clashing with each other. And I approached this organization in Delhi called INTAC, and I said, do you think we can propose to the government of Madhya Pradesh that INTAC actually takes on the job of creating an integrated conservation plan for Pachmari? And INTAC got interested, and we had a very interesting chief secretary of Madhya Pradesh who also said, this sounds fantastic, because he was the first person to admit that their methods of doing any kind of planning, ecological planning, development planning, was so outmoded that they didn't make sense anymore. Because we had inherited a system of planning from the British in the 1950s, which is called town and country planning, where you basically look at trends. You look at, say, water demand over the last 15 years, and you project it into the next 15 years. We say, well, today, based on the trend, we're going to need so many million gallons of water for drinking water. And that works fine as long as you have unlimited resources. But the minute you start getting limited resources, you have to start rethinking all of this. And all of development planning in India was done on that old, outmoded, trend-based system. And now we were looking at a different system where you're splitting it up into all these different sectors and integrating them and making sure they don't clash. But you're also trying to look at desirable outcomes for each sector, and then seeing how your plan can achieve that desirable outcome, which is a much better way to do things. Anyway, to cut a long story short, we didn't get very far with this because the chief secretary retired in due time. A new guy came along, wasn't interested in doing this, so we weren't able to make a plan. But I limped back to Delhi after having spent 3.5, 4 years in Pachmari, with nothing to show for all this time that I'd spent there. I'd given up filmmaking in 94. And I thought, oops, better do something, not just be a bum. And I looked across my front gate, and there was a tree growing there. And I said, I am getting to know trees, and I've lived with this tree for 25 years. I don't know what it is. And I thought, why don't I, given how low the general common denominator of knowledge about trees is, why don't I write a little book about trees? Because I'm learning about trees and it's fun. It'll become like a hobby, really. And I thought that it would be maybe a 30-page booklet. And if nobody would publish it, then I could not cyclocide, but I photocopy it in color and distribute it to 30 of my friends. And that's how I got into starting to work on the trees of Delhi. And then if you have an anal personality like I do, you just go deeper and deeper and deeper. And it got more and more ambitious. And that's really how the trees of Delhi happened. And Yeah, so The Trees of Delhi was finally published in 2006, so many years after I'd started. And I had the luxury, I must say, that um, because Arundhati, I was married to Arundhati at the time, because she was just making it big as a writer, I had the luxury of not having to look over my shoulder to look at the wolf at the door, saying, "What are you earning? Why are you not earning any money?" And that's really what made it possible for me to, just go out and research and write and do it at my own time. Um,
So, knowing, so you have taught yourself something that is so, at least so difficult for most of us, botany. So, was this when you learned this is how you, while doing Trees of Delhi?
oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Mm.
I mean, when I think back at what I knew about trees, say in my 30s and 40s, I probably knew 6 or 7 trees. If you showed me an amalthus tree, I wouldn't have been able to tell you what it is if it wasn't in flower. I probably wouldn't be able to tell you what a mango tree was if it didn't have fruit on it. So I really didn't know my trees at all. But people have sometimes asked me whether I always had an interest in nature and in trees. And the only thing that I remember very clearly is that even as a boy, whenever I was in wilderness, it just seemed so right. It just seemed as if it's so perfect. I always loved being in the wilderness, and I guess that had something to do with it. But I also remember very clearly in my 20s getting into bird watching and buying Salim Ali's books, field guides, and thinking what a wonderful thing to do for people, to write a field guide that can give so much pleasure to people, because it's a bit like, doing the book was like a giant jigsaw puzzle. There were all these trees, and getting to know what the indigenous trees was not a big problem, but we have so many exotics. And what flora do you go to begin to? Do you go to a Brazilian flora, or do you go to an Australian flora, or a South African? Where do you begin to look at what these trees are? And most people don't. Even the horticulture people, the nursery people, don't know what these trees are. And sometimes I'd get really lucky. Like I remember going into a nursery once and seeing a tree that I didn't recognize. Early days of researching the book. And I asked a Mali, and Mali said, "You asked the Chaudhry might be able to help you." And I went to the Chaudhry, and he says, "हाँ, मुझे भी नहीं पता इसका, but ये sales tax tree है." So I said, "Sales tax tree?" He said, "Sales tax tree." So I knew he was probably mispronouncing a botanical name. So I came back and I looked up Maheshwari's Trees of Delhi, the plants and flora of Delhi. And I first looked at all the essays, and there was nothing that even closely resembled this tree. And then I thought it might be a soft C, and I found Celtis, Tetrandra, and everything matched perfectly. So that's how I found Celtis, and it's become quite a rare tree in Delhi. So it was really fun to find it like that. But in other cases, there was another tree so Sundar Nursery is a very interesting place, because nursery people, horticulture people, brought back a lot of trees there from joints that they might have made to other places. And they would try these trees out, new trees. And then if they didn't work, if they failed, they'd remain in Sundar Nursery as these failed specimens. So I tracked down something like 16 species of trees in Sundar Nursery, which were the only ones of their kind, because they had not done well. They just remained inside the nursery. But there was one particular set of 2 trees close to each other, about 7 or 8 feet tall, and they didn't seem to flower or fruit, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And if ever I met a botanist who was visiting Delhi, I'd say, "Can you come with me, please, to Sundar Nursery and see if you can help me diagnose what these trees are?" And nobody could. And finally, we met a guy, and he said, "If you allow me to take a wood core, I'll take it to the wood lab in FRI in Dehradun, and maybe we can tell you what it is." And even that didn't work. And I thought, all right, so there's no shame in saying that, okay, there's these 2 trees that I can't recognize in my book. And then I was in Australia, um, maybe 3 years before the book was finished, and I saw this tall tree, about 70 feet tall, and something rang a bell. And I thought, my God, could this be the tree that I've been seeing? I mean, my trees were little stunted fellows. This was a tall, strapping, beautiful guy in the Sydney Botanical Garden. So when nobody was looking, I took a compound leaf and I put it in my pocket and I brought it back. And sure enough, it was the tree.
Hmm.
So it turned out to be, uh, a tree that was only found in coastal New South Wales.
Wow, what was
It's
it?
endemic. It's something called, let me see what if I remember. It's called Cupeniopsis. Yeah, it's not a particularly well-known tree. It's not found other places. But Cupeniopsis was the tree that I find. Both the trees in Sundarnasi are now dead, so it doesn't even exist in Delhi
Oh.
anymore. But it was, it was fun. That's what I mean by it being like a giant jigsaw puzzle.
Hmm.
You were constantly faced with these questions. I remember going to the NBRI, the National Botanical Research Institute in Lucknow, and this is very early days of my starting to identify things. And I found 4 or 5 of the trees that I was curious about, and they didn't have names, but they had two sets of numbers. They had one set of numbers which were white on black, and another set of numbers which were yellow on blue, and they didn't seem to have any correspondence to each other. So I wrote them down. And I said, "Where can I find out what the names of these trees are?" So they said, "You go to the director's office and he'll let you know." So I went to the director and he said, "नहीं साहब, ये आपको stock register में मिलेगा. Go to the stock register, you'll find out." Stock register had gone for an audit, so it wasn't available. So he said, "No, you just write me a letter." And I said, "Which number should I give you? Should I give you the white and black or the yellow and blue?" He said, "No, आप दोनों number दे दो, and I'll give you a reply." So I wrote this letter to him as soon as I got back to Delhi. And I said, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are the numbers. I'll be very happy if you can tell me what they are. So he took about a month. And he wrote back and he said, "Dear Mr. Krishen, I have received your letter of so-and-so instant. And with regard to your queries, I have the following to offer. Number 1, tree number so-and-so, black on white and yellow on blue. Identity not known. Tree number 2, and he went through the entire list.
Oh
They
God.
knew none of them. But they reproduced the whole thing painstakingly. And
Oh my gosh.
so there were disappointments, but it was all fun. It was really great fun to do.
I was amused by that, your letter of X date instant.
Instant
That
hamper.
used to be
That is the
yeah,
old way of. My grandfather used to write to me like that and say that, "My dear Pradip, I received your letter so and so instance."
yeah. My father used to. So, uh, Arti, before we shift to the actual practice of restoration, something you wanted to ask about the early days?
No, just that. So when I met Pradeep in 2013, and something that struck me, which was very illuminating and instructional for me, was how he read land and how he read the landscape and how he called himself anal just now. Pradeep, you just called yourself anal, but the attention to detail and the way you observe, how has how okay, I guess the question is, was that always you? Were you always so attentive to detail? And what is the importance of observation when it comes to something like this, like landscapes and reading?
Well, the second bit is much easier to answer than the first. I mean, it's hugely important because everything is really all about detail and all about. And it's the thing about landscapes is that it's so variable and it's so difficult to actually put it into little categories and sort it and make it seem finite. The more I've traveled in the desert, the more I found it's so complex and so variable and so mixed that, so you really need to have your wits about you and, to try and I don't feel I understand the desert still. I mean, it's a lot of it is mysterious and difficult to fathom for me. But have I always been like that? I don't know. Um, I don't know how to answer that. I mean, certainly as a filmmaker,
Mm.
you have to be hugely attentive to detail. Um, it's very difficult because I mean, it's sort of seamless, isn't it? You know, you have the scene, the art department, what you're looking at, but you also have the acting, and you have the words. Yeah, it's very very full of detail, and you have
Mm.
to be attentive.
Yeah.
But I don't know whether I've always been like that. I mean, I don't know where it's come from, but I think that with when I started looking at restoration, started when I went to Jodhpur for the first time, I didn't know the desert. I started working in Jodhpur before I could say that I'd actually understood the desert or knew the desert, and that put such an onus on you to actually be observant and try and learn, look, understand. That it happens. So whether I was always like that or not, I don't know, but I was certainly daunted by having to work in a landscape that I didn't know,
Mm.
and therefore I was wanting to take in as much as I could and to learn by observance. So I'll give you a simple example. When we started planting, we were getting 60-65% survival rates with our plants, and I was thinking, well, why what is it that causes the 30 or 35% to not happen? And the only way to do that was to actually collar every single planting pit, measure its depth, you know, work with 2 or 3 different kinds of planting mixes in terms of your soil, record what plant you were putting in, see if you could differentiate between planting sites, the site quality of, and so on, and visit these plants every 6 months to see whether there was any kind of story. So if you're using an Excel sheet, you can put all the species together. You could put one species together on and say, all right, so what is it? Is there a pattern that you can discern? Is there something that, and I don't think we always got a pattern, but we sometimes got patterns, which were very instructive. And I put that all down to just being systematic and trying to organize our observations in a way that made sense.
You kind
Back
of,
to Prem, because I have other questions, but let's go on to the to Rajodha and so on, and then we'll
Mhm.
come back to those questions.
yeah. Pradeep, actually, you kind of preempted one of the questions I was going to ask you, which was whether your work as a filmmaker and as a writer had informed how you approach ecosystems. Uh, could you tell us a little bit about that first real restoration project of yours, the Jodha Desert Rock Park? I remember you used to take people on walks over there, and that is where I met you for the first time. I joined that walk, and as usual, didn't complete it, but which is what Aarti is laughing about.
There's a funny story, Pradeep. I don't even know if you know this story. Do you
Oh,
remember Payal used to do those walks for us? She's going to kill me that I'm going to tell the story on air, but
Uh-huh.
it has to be told.
Okay.
So she does these walks. She did these walks, right? She led these walks in the morning, and it was around the time of Riff, I think, one of those riffs, okay, 2013 or something like that. And oh no, Chandni time, correct, Chandni time. And so Prem had come with a friend, and then he joined the walk in the morning. And the whole time through the walk, Payal has called him Sanjay,
Mhm.
and he has not pushed back. I don't know what he thought. So, Prem, what did you think when she was calling you Sanjay? You just thought that maybe she's calls everyone Sanjay. What is it?
I don't know. I mean, I remember actually Pradeep was also there at the time, but Pradeep was leading a group and he was walking a little bit ahead. But Pradeep, Payal, all of them were there, and all the people who were going on the walk were there. And at some point, we split into two groups. So Payal wanted everybody's name. I said, "Hi, Payal, my name is Prem." And then she started calling me Sanjay. I was like, yeah, okay. I mean, if if
It's
if
hilarious.
if that floats your boat, and then she,
I would have done the same, I think, Arti. If somebody had called me, Ritu by mistake, I would have said, all right, I'm Ritu for you.
yeah,
How does it matter? Or whatever.
yeah, so
Hilarious.
kind of Prem by any other name sort of thing. So anyway, so could you tell us about that
So
project?
Raj
How
Jodha
did
was
it
actually,
happen?
Raj Jodha was not my first project, actually, Prem, Sanjay.
Uh-huh. Okay. Oh God, no. There's two people.
There are two people. So the first time I got involved in any kind of restoration was happened by accident because I have some friends who run a river running place just beyond Rishikesh, in the lower
Mhm.
southern Himalayan area, and they're very close friends, and they bought themselves some land above the Ganga, maybe 2 acres or so, and they said, you keep talking about trees and all. I hadn't published my book yet. But, why don't you tell us what trees to plant in our lodge? So I said, I mean, it doesn't work like that. It's like asking me to come and design your drawing room for you. What trees do you like, plant? What do you like? They said, nahi yaar, tum batao. So I said, look, if you're clever, you will pick up seedlings from the forest floor and you plant things that are beautifully adapted to that soil, those minerals, that climate. And I gave them the kind of spiel that you would if you were advocating a native plant garden. And it made a lot of sense to them. And I said, look, if you plant right, you'll never need to look after these plants. They will look after themselves once they're adapted. They said, yeah, फिर हमको कुछ list do. So I'd written an introduction to this very interesting forester called Kanjilal, who wrote his book in 1908. And I consulted Kanjilal and I gave him a list of something like 20 odd trees and another 15 shrubs. And I said, why don't you, this is what you need to plant there. So my friend was very pleased and he went away and came back a few weeks later, cursing me, saying, yeah, what is this list you keep? I said, why? He said, I went to a nursery, I found one plant, I said, I didn't ask you to go to a nursery because nurseries, they don't stock this kind of stuff. I said, you'll have to pick up stuff from, he said, but how will I know what to pick up? I said, yeah, well, you'll have to learn. So then he bullied me. He said, you have to come and start us off, come and tell us what to do and visit us once a month. And so I said, all right. And I thought, fun, I didn't know the flora of that region. It was beautiful jungle, really wonderful jungle. So I started going once a month. And I said to him, I said, don't give me a Mali because Malis will have to, we'll have to get them to unlearn a lot of what they do. So get me just a village boy, a local lad who knows a little bit of the trees around him. And I will learn with him about the flora of this place. So this guy called Madan joined me, and then Madan had another assistant. And we started exploring together, and we would go out in the jungle, and I was carrying, my little flora book, and I was identifying stuff. And it was, more of the fun that I have with tree spotting. And Madan turned out to have a real talent and a green thumb. And, I taught him how to do a cutting using hormone powders and stuff. And so if I saw something that I liked, and I would say, Madan, we need about at least 25 of these by the time I get back next time, he'd have 40 ready for me, the next time, all doing beautifully. So he was very talented and very good. And he had great fun doing it as well, which was wonderful. So in that first year, Prem, partly because the soil was so fertile, but also it's quite 2,000 millimeters of rain in that area. We just had the most phenomenal results. I mean, the place was just completely transformed. So that was my first experience, and I was staggered by how well things had done. And they were all things that were from there, completely native stuff. And then something went wrong, and it's a long story, and I don't want to, get into that. But basically, they acquired a manager who sacked my Malis, and I got angry and I walked off. And I said, look, if you're not going to support the Malis, because we've been doing this together, I'm not involved with it. So I didn't go back. And eventually that whole garden just sank into the ground because
Oh,
they got a Mali from the tea estates from Assam, who didn't understand that the dry period at all, and he just ruined the garden. But anyway, that's another story. So that's the first experience I had around 2002 or 2003, perhaps.
mhm.
And then the way the next thing happened was that I had a friend who worked in Intac in Delhi, and she called me over one day and she said, can you come to the office? Because I got two people from Jodhpur who want to do something in a place called Nagaur. Can you come and advise them? So I said, I don't know anything about, the flora of the desert. So they said, no, you just come and talk to them. So I met a gentleman who was the CEO of the Medanga Trust and the princess, the Maharaja's daughter, Shivranjini. And they said, I met them in this Mapu Singh's office in Intac. And they said, we have this fort, and the fort has this big ring of sandy soil, but it's not good soil because there's rubble underneath. The fort has been attacked many times. Sieges happened around the fort. So there were probably garrisons living, in this moat of sand around the palaces. And they said it's now full of this Australian tree that we call Barlia. And then they described the tree, and I realized that they were talking about Prosopis juliflora, which of course is not Australian. And I pointed that out, and they told me later that when you said that it's not Australian, we thought this guy knows nothing. But of course they were wrong. But they said, would you be willing to come and help us do something, create this, this forest around this area? I said, I'm not familiar with that. So they said, no, just come and take a look and see what needs to be done. So I went, I took a train, and I was met at the station by this large gentleman who was the CEO and the big Dada botanist of the desert, a man called Dr. M. Bhandari, who was also there. And we went together to Nagaur, and I started working there with their local horticulture team, basically just planting it up with native stuff. And again, we had very decent results in a relatively short amount of time.
And how did you source the native stuff there? Did you go into the
Um,
desert to do it, or?
yeah, we were picking up things, so the first time I went there was in the dry season. We had to wait for the rains, and then we were picking up seedlings.
Okay.
So nursery didn't have a little bit of stuff we got from nursery, but mostly no.
Hmm.
And I did that for a year and a half, and
You
then the CEO took
sorry to interrupt again. So you said there were already Bavlia over there. So did you have to then uproot the Bavlia as well over
the
there too?
barley had already been taken out.
Oh, it
So
had
by
been
the
taken.
time I got there, I found they'd made a grid of planting holes, very mathematical. They wanted to plant so everything 6 feet away from each other. So I said, just cover it all back up again and we do it in a random way. So then the CEO took me I was landing at Jodhpur and then driving to Nagaur each time. And one day he took me to Jodhpur and he said, I think I've got something to show you that's right up your street. And I remember thinking, well, how does he know what's up my street? I mean, how does he know what my street is anyway? But he took me to the edge of what later became Jodha Park, and he said, how would you like to green this area? And I went gulp inside me because it was completely chock-a-block full of, this invasive tree. But it was a beautiful bit of land, even though it was really rocky and eroded, but it was right up, with the fort at the back. It was just an amazing piece of real estate. So I said, what is it that you mean when you say you want to green it? I mean, how do you imagine it? He said, what do you mean? So I said, no, I mean, do you see it like a park with, sort of filled up with, all the valleys and gullies all, filled up with soil, with park benches and flowering trees? He said, yeah, exactly. That's what we want. So I said, do you realize what that will entail in the sense that first of all, you're going to have to bring in several million tons of soil, literally. and then you're going to have to water everything every single day for the rest of your life. So he said, well, in that case, it doesn't sound such a good idea, but what is the option? I said, look, the option is simply to try and see if you can uh, recreate the natural ecology of a rocky part of the desert. And he says, yeah, but thorny shrub, what are you going to get? What is the natural ecology of a rocky part of the desert? And how would you go around doing that? So I said, look, I'll send you a little note on this, which I did. I came back and I wrote him I think a 2-pager, which I still have, basically saying that, we would go out to little rocky outcrops. We'd look for places that were not particularly affected by grazing and stuff like that. And we'd try and, look for plants that would do well here. But if we find the right plants, you'll never need to look after them. And this area was about 170 acres. So it's a huge amount of land with barely any soil. So I sent him this note, and then I didn't hear from him for something like a month. And I thought, oh, well, all right. They didn't like the idea. But then I got a letter saying that, sorry it's taken so long. We've had to circulate this among our trustees. When can you start? And I said, I could start whenever you say. So I think it was November or December of 2005, I went there and we set it all up and decided that on the 1st of April, to make it financially convenient for their accountants, we'd start the project. So that's really how Jodha Park happened.
Mm.
And I have a very clear memory of, so maybe I'll come to my clear memory later, but yeah, so I didn't know very much about so everything we did in Nagaur was about plants that grow in sand. And now suddenly it was about what was more or less a completely separate suite of plants that were going to be adapted to growing in rock.
And how did was Bhandari there for this project as well?
Not in any formal way, but I would spend time with him every now and again. And I did one very memorable trip with him. He a few months into the project, I said, well, Dari Sahab, I'd love to go into the desert with you because you can show us stuff that, perhaps you don't even know what it is. And he had problems with one knee. So he said, I can't walk. So we said, you stay in the Jeep and that Jeep can go all over the place, but just come with us. And so we did a trip and it was amazing because he'd say, there's a Mata ka mandir here behind Bikaner. If you could go there.
Oh,
Let's see the little one.
Little one, she's a big one. He's hurt his ear today and got
Goodness, look
oh,
at you. Look at you. I almost feel like bringing Zorro. It looks like a carbon copy. Sweetie.
So he would say, if you just drive behind this hill and if you climb this hill, if you go behind the Mata Mandir, you'll find a thin plant with just 4 petals. I last went there 25 years ago. It should still be there. And sure enough, there'd be this little yellow brassica called Farsitia. So he was wonderful going with him, and we became great friends. He was a very nice man, but he was a big boaster. So once you started him talking, he wouldn't stop. You could ask him a question and then go and have lunch and come back, and he'd still be talking about boasting about everything he'd done, but he was a very eminent botanist. And I probably did 3 or 4 field visits with him around Jodhpur and one long visit. And he was always very helpful, helped us to identify things we initially had problems with. But the interesting thing about Bhandari, in fact, about most taxonomists that we know, they're not interested in ecology at all. They're taxonomists, they can sort through a forest of discarded synonyms and all of that, but they don't know, and they're not interested particularly in what kind of soil, the plant grows in, or what kind of moisture regime it needs, and any of that, And that's why sometimes reading a flora is a very disappointing thing, because floras are arranged phylogenetically, with a sense of how things have evolved in terms of primitive families and later families, but they don't give you any information about what the plant needs
Mm.
if you want to grow it. And that,
Grow
that,
it.
that was a big problem, actually. And it's still a big problem, because for people who are trying to plant in new areas, even if you have floras for the whole country now, but very few of them have any helpful information about just the natural ecology that plants need.
Mm-hmm.
The, I mean, when you talk about the restoration, particularly of Rao Jodha, it sounds very simple, very easy. But I remember that day when we met, you were talking about how every single invasive plant you had to go right down to the root, get it out, and it was a lot of hard labor, for which you had some of those local people working, and then planting the native species, etc. What does a win look like?
A win.
Hmm.
I'm not sure what you mean, Prem.
In terms of at what point do you get the feeling that yeah, something is
That it's
working?
working.
Yeah. Mhm.
So let me begin to tell you the story of what we were faced with when we started. So you have this place that is just chock-a-block full of this invasive South American tree, right? Central American, South American tree. And everybody knows that it's a really difficult tree to eradicate, because it cut it at ground level, it just coppices and springs up. So I tried to do a little bit of research, and the only helpful bit of information I got was that it has a budding zone uh, below ground, which goes down for about 2 feet, which means that if you cut it anywhere before 2 feet below the ground, it just, from that budding zone, it just coppices again. So we knew we had to go down 2 feet in the rock. And how do you do that? We'd
Mhm.
also asked a lot of people who might have had answers how they have tried to deal with Barley, and we got a lot of cockeyed answers. Somebody said, just cut it at ground level, put fresh gobar, and and of course it didn't work. There were some ideas that had to do with the full moon and stuff, and that was rubbish. Somebody said dynamite. Somebody said,
Oh
we said
God.
what? And he said, no, not a big charge of dynamite. 1/100th the normal charge. And we said, yeah, but you don't want to blow up these little tekeras and hills. And they said, maybe. So we tried it, and it wasn't what we wanted, because we were also dealing with the historic uh, landscape of the fort. We didn't want to, change that. And then somebody brought, oh yeah, we also tried these compressors, these compressors. It's basically it's an auger. It's like a drill, but it only
Mhm.
has a 4-inch diameter.
Okay.
And we tried it. There was a Jeep that came with a compressor, while the engine was running, and it was powering the auger, and the auger took ages to go down this. So the rock is rhyolite. It's a volcanic rock, which is harder than granite, very difficult to get into, very crystalline. So nothing seemed to work, and we were very worried about how we were going to get into the rock deep down enough to be able to get at get below the budding zone of the precipice. Somebody said, why don't you try the traditional miners of Rajasthan, who are called Khandwalias? It's a community called the Khandwalias. And I'd heard vaguely about the Khandwalias, but see, the standard building stone in Jodhpur is sandstone. It's
Mhm.
mined from there. It's dirt cheap. It's even cheaper than bricks. So all buildings are made of sandstone bricks, sandstone blocks. And the Khandwalias are the people who mine it and work with it. And I thought, why would Khandwalias do anything about rhyolite? Because this is not what they use. This is not what is mined for building or for anything else. It's only used maybe to put into a foundation, perhaps, or something, or a wall, a building wall outside. Anyway, so we called a man. There was a man called Dhan Singh, who was one of the leaders of a small community of Khandwalas. He said, "Dhan Singh ji, can you come to the park and show us whether or not it's possible for you to break into this rock?" He said, "Sure." And we took him to a precipice bush, which was about 4 feet tall. We said, "Can you go down 2 feet below the ground into this bush?" And he said, "Yeah." And he was totally cocky and confident about it. And they essentially use a very heavy hammer head. It's about 4 kilograms, and what's the chain called in English? Do you know what a chain is called? A hammer and chisel.
Chisel.
One of the rock chisels. So he tapped the ground a couple of times lightly with his hammer, and then he turned his face away, and he hit the ground 3 times hard. And he thought he was turning his face away so that, in case any shards of rock came out because of the blows he was making. But we didn't know it then, but we realized later that it had nothing to do with closing his eyes and shielding them from the shards of rock. He was listening. He was listening to the sound that his hammer made on the rock, because it gave him all the information that he needed to decide where to start going in from. Kahan se bhara hai, kahan se pola hai. All of that information he got literally from the hammer blows. And he said, "Okay, now just leave me alone for a bit and come back in 2 hours." And he came back in 2 hours, and he hadn't got very far, but he'd started breaking the rock down. And he started pulling out these ribbon-like roots. The roots had snaked into cracks in the rock, and that was the part of the success of the Bavlia, of the precipice. Mm-hmm. But because they were going into linear cracks, the roots had literally become like ribbons. They were 2-dimensional. And he was pulling them out. You see what I'm getting there. To give me a little more time. In about 4 hours, he'd gone in and pulled out he got down to 2 feet, more than 2 feet. And we realized then that this was our solution. So we hired a whole platoon of Khandwalias. We had 15 Khandwalias. We used to call them our cricket team with reserves. Give them cricket trophies, we gave them protective eye gear. None of it lasted with them, but that's how it started. And then for the next 7 years, they were employed for 365 days in the year, with occasional holiday, to do nothing else but uproot precipice. And we followed in their wake. So they would take a bavli out of a particular area and make a pit, a nice deep pit. And that pit would become a planting pit for us, because we had assumed that bavli was showing us where it was possible for a plant to grow in that very forbidding, difficult kind of terrain. So we took this decision that only where a planting pit had been created because bavli had been removed from it, that was going to be where we planted. So we didn't have to say, should we plant there or should we plant there? Bavli was telling us where to plant. Mm. So typically they were clearing 6 or 7 hectares a year. So let's say 15 acres a year. And I have a very clear memory in that first year when we didn't have a long lead time into the monsoon. So that first year, maybe they only did 2 hectares, 3 hectares. And I was sitting on a rock, watching all this work going on, and there were these donkeys going back and forth with panniers of soil, to fill the pits that had been created. And the whole place looked like a piece of Swiss cheese, because there were so many holes, and especially in the slightly lower areas where there was a tiny bit more soil, the bavli was so thickly spread there. And I remember thinking at some point, I said, what arrogance on my part to think that I know what to do, in a landscape that I'm not familiar with. And what if I fail? And I remember this frisson of fear that went through me. I said, my God, what if I'm a complete fool and have no idea what I'm doing? And then I consoled myself with the thought that, well, if nothing works, I'll just put back precipice to the floor and all these chatting balls. Say, I'm sorry I failed. I'm sorry I wasted some of your money, but it didn't work. But it did work. But to answer your question about when did it feel like it was really going to happen, I think it took a while, because things things go very, very slowly out in this particular kind of landscape. Our growing season is just a few weeks long. It's maybe 6 weeks long, 7 weeks long. It's just, so you get a lot of herbaceous stuff happening on the ground when the rains come very quickly. It's very ephemeral. It doesn't last very long. But if anything is a perennial, it has to be very opportunistic and do whatever it can in that little window of time when there's some moisture in the ground, and then just become dormant and wait until conditions get better again. So we didn't. I have a huge collection of photographs and all because I was documenting everything. And even in year 3 or sometimes in year 4, I didn't feel that despondent about it then. But now when I look at pictures from year 3 and 4, it looks as if, my God, hardly anything has moved, It's very, very slow. But, it's worked beautifully. It's worked really beautifully. And it's worked very slowly. And that's one of the problems of doing this kind of work, that, to find a stakeholder who has the patience and is willing to wait and is willing to let you do stuff over time. Because people want results yesterday. That's the issue.
I was just going to ask about that. So, MMT and all that were okay with this?
So, for one, we were not costing them a lot of money. I was working for a pittance. I was being paid a $150,000 a year for the first 2 years, and got bumped up to 2 lakhs a year in year 3. So I knew that if I wanted more money, I wouldn't have been able to do this project. So really, we were trying to keep costs very low. And because costs were low, and because they had a wonderful steady source of income from their ticket sales to Maranga 4, even in those days, they were getting about 1 million visitors a year. So they had this sort of income that they could count on. They didn't pay too much attention to us. We were sort of something happening in the background. I don't think that the Maharaja, for example, has ever really walked in the park. Even once. He's come to the visitor center, but maybe he's looked at the park from on top or from a distance. Even other people, the museum director, Karni, or any of the other ones, they didn't really pay much attention. We were just doing our thing, But they learned that the big thing was that there was a relationship of trust, which was great, and that helped a lot. And I've never found that kind of equation with anyone subsequently. I've just given up working on a project that I spent 9 years on because I can't stand to work with the Jaipur government anymore. So I've just literally walked out, and it probably means the death of a park that I've created. But what do you do? So yeah, but it has been a beautiful relationship with the trust.
Yeah. What about allies? Did you have allies who you could bounce things off of, or who would be with you, or was this an essentially lonely, solitary job that you were doing?
No allies in terms of the ecological stuff. I felt very alone then. I didn't know anybody else who was doing anything like this. But my friend Golak, the architect, who I'd worked with in Pachmani, he came in and we worked together on creating the visitor center, which was a lot of fun. It was amazingly good fun to do that, because we had to convert a historic gateway into Jodhpur, which was 4 centuries old and was disused and was bricked up and shut. They were slaking lime in pits outside. It was in very bad condition, but we had to sort of spruce it up and then create a little garden, a native plant garden with hardly any soil there. And that was just a wonderful. In fact, I just written a little booklet about it, which I must send you, Arati, if you send me your snail mail address. I'll send one to you, Prem, as well, if you send me your address. But yeah, so that was, and this took many months. So it is not something that was just happened at one point. Um, and then so while I was doing, my Delhi book came out in 2006. And 2006 was when I started doing the Jodha Park thing as well. And then around 2009, I started working on my jungle trees book.
Mm.
So I was doing that while I was doing this work.
Mm.
And then after that, I had a designer called Kadambari Mishra who then started working also on some of the design work that we needed to do for
The park.
Rajodha Park. So, but I didn't. So now I'm in a beautiful community of restoration people called the Ecological Restoration Alliance, and there's 300 or 400 of us now, in the alliance, and it's just a very beautiful thing. It's not a registered society. We don't have a bank account. It's just a community of people who chat and exchange things and share stuff, but nothing of the kind. Then it just felt very much being on my own.
Right. I kind of wanted to expand the conversation a little bit to,
Mhm.
say, India's mainstream approach to, for want of a better word, greening. You've often said that official afforestation efforts do more harm than good. Why do you say that?
Um, Gosh, that's a huge topic, Prem.
Yeah.
But I'll give you an example. So
Hmm.
in Delhi, every year, the local government announces that they're planting 6 million trees, or 8 million trees, or 11 million trees. And our question always is, which trees
Yeah.
and where? You know, because the, Delhi is not one ecology. Delhi has at least 4 separate microhabitats where the soil is different, the minerals are different, the moisture regime is very different. And
Hmm.
unless you plant with the ecology, you're not going to succeed, right? If you're planting 7 million trees, the question is where are you going to get these trees from?
Right.
Nobody grows native trees in the city. So you're going to ransack all the commercial nurseries. What do they have? They have exotics of all kinds. They have rubbish. So your plant, it's a bit like I don't know. It's like being completely blind and doing it for publicity's sake and just for being able to claim statistics. But nothing survives because a lot of these trees, if they're thirsty trees, can only be kept alive if the water table is very high where they are, if they're in the floodplain or if they're in the next to the Yamuna, and nobody's looking after them year on year, and you can't. How can you look after 7 million trees,
Yeah.
year on year and give them nutrients and water? So it's an exercise in futility, and I'm I've now seen a lot of close up how the government works, how the forest department works. In fact, I'm very, very involved with the Central Ridge in Delhi, which is an amazing place. It's about 8 square kilometers of
Hmm.
degraded semi-wild forest in the heart of a metropolitan city with 30 million people. It's an amazing thing that it still exists. And I've been looking at the history of the Central Ridge ever since Delhi first became the capital of British India, 1911. So I followed what was happening to the forest, to the Central Ridge. So they started. So when they first created the imperial capital, you had the Yamuna flowing as its eastern edge, and the ridge as its western edge. And
Hmm.
the ridge was designated to be what they called an amenity forest, by which they meant that it was a forest in which Bada Sahib would ride their horses in and feel like they were galloping through an English countryside, and they would try and kill jackals instead of foxes. And around 1914, 1915, they decided to start to plant up a small amount of the ridge, something like 200 acres. on an experimental basis, and they planted 8 or 9 species of trees, none of which were native to the ridge. And the reason they got interested in the ridge was that in 1911, 1912, when they were still trying to decide where Government House should be situated, where the Viceroy would live, which later became Rashtrapati Bhavan, they hadn't found a suitable place, and somebody took Lord Hardinge riding on the ridge in August of 1912. And August, the ridge looks just wonderful. It's green, all the grasses are up, it's looking splendid. And he writes to Lutyens and company who are on the boat going back to England, saying, I found the place, the ideal place for Government House. It should be on the highest point of eminence on the ridge, and we will look down benignly on our subjects, and they will look up at golden cupola with the Union Jack flying on top, and it'll be just perfect. The only thing he said is that we need to know for sure whether we can create a garden of beautiful trees here and make it like Versailles. Because if we can't grow things, then of course the whole plan is a non-starter. So he calls in his favorite forester, a man called Peter Clutterbuck, who is CF, Conservative Forest in what was then the United Provinces, who comes to Delhi and draws up a list of suitable wild trees, which actually is quite a cockeyed list. But from then onwards, the forest department starts to plant up trees. And 3 years later, they say, oops, sorry, it hasn't worked. The minute we withdrew irrigation, all the trees have died. Because, they were running things like jamuns and stuff, which are riverine trees. Now, the forest department has never learned the lesson about this. Even today, they're planting up the Central Ridge with a so-called restoration effort with the wrong species. So there's a strange kind of blind spot that there is with the forest department. Restoration is not something they're taught when they go through their forestry training. They're not taught how to do restoration, and it just doesn't seem to make sense to me at all. They have now an SOP. They have a standard operating procedure where they list 42 species of trees that are native to the rocky quartzitic hills of Delhi. And that list is more or less right. I would quarrel with 2 or 3 other species, but they're mostly okay. Then the way they work is they work with contractors. So they'll hire a contractor and they say, your job is to clear this area and plant and source these trees. Contractor looks for these trees and doesn't find them. So he finds 3 of them, and then he fills in the blanks with other things that he thinks might be native. So he finds jungle jalebi, which is actually South American, and says, oh, it's got an Indian sounding name, it's got jungle in it, so jungle jalebi will arouse. So, it's just an exercise in stupidity, but ignorance, And everywhere you go, whether you go through Madhya Pradesh, you go through Rajasthan, when you see the forest department at work, it makes you want to weep.
Yeah.
That is the sad reality of it, And compensatory afforestation is a joke. It's an absolute joke.
I'm glad you brought that up. You're just reading our minds. That's something that I wanted to ask you about. The fact that it is a joke, because in so many ways, even when you cut a forest, say in the Nicobar Islands, and then you plant up in Haryana.
We have a rainforest coming up in Haryana.
I know. Madness, yeah, total madness. It's just crazy. So, I just want to jump a little ahead, because this whole thing that you have talked about, if you were to take it in sum, restoration seems like something that is deliberate, slow, necessarily slow, very dependent upon understanding what the mix of trees in that region, a micro region almost, is, and then sourcing it very deliberately, and then planting it and taking care of it, until it can take care of itself. But do we have the appetite for something like that in India? And what we're seeing more and more of, for example, the Miyawaki forests, and the push for it, where it's just one big, just like, okay, here's a chunk of money, go make a forest happen in X amount of time.
Yeah.
that seems to be the thinking, like, planting anything anywhere is good, rather than
Yeah,
not planting at all.
anything green goes. Even
Anything green goes,
even
and
even processes.
something is better than nothing. At least they're doing something. All those
Yes,
kinds of thinking.
absolutely.
How does one combat something like that? How does one slow people down, because uh, it doesn't work?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So recently, a group of us who all happen to belong to the Ecological Restoration Alliance, the ERA group in Delhi, we met together and we said, why don't we start a little group that goes around, starts visiting some of the parks. Delhi has something like 18,000 parks, some amazing figure. But let's start looking at the parks and start writing them up and
Mm,
talking about the things that we like, but also about some of the things that are really wrong with our parks. Because one of the most pressing issues in Delhi is going to be the impending shortage of water. We already have a shortage of water. It's going to get worse and worse. And parks are so profligate about how they use water and what they plant in terms of things that are thirsty and need water that it's ridiculous. So we wanted to write about what's wrong with lawns. How do you decolonize a lawn? And there's this plant which I don't know whether you know from your part of the world, but there's a plant called Wedelia, which has become a
oh my
go-to.
God, it's such a mess.
It's
The
become
one
a
with the
go.
yellow flowers, right?
Yeah,
Mm.
it's become a go-to plant for
Oh my God,
horticulture here.
highly invasive here.
Because you see, two things happen. First of all, there's a budget to plant trees every year, so they eat up more and more area with planting trees and creating shade, and they don't know what to do with the shade. So then they reach for Wedelia. And the trouble with Wedelia is that Wedelia, for one, is hugely invasive, but
Hmm.
it'll grow happily in the shade.
Hmm.
But then it makes the areas where it grows unusable. You can't walk in them anymore because it's
Yeah.
feet high, and so
So,
you've got green,
mm,
and everybody's saying, "Arey, bahut badhiya kiya aapne itna green kar diya," but you've actually made a part of the park unusable. So we want to take some of these issues and write about them and have what we call primers that on our website. And we just started that, but this is happening on there just is such little literacy about
mm,
the environment and about
mm.
plants and what to grow and what is nice. You talk about Miyawakis are abominable. I mean, I was in Kutch recently and I went to visit the world's largest Miyawaki in Butch.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I can't tell you how horrible it
It's
was.
terrible.
You
I
know?
saw Somel's note on it, and
Yeah, yeah.
it's terrible. Yeah.
I mean, it's so ugly. It's so terrible that I can't tell you. It's becoming a pure subabul forest with this invasive, horrible South American tree because it
Correct.
feeds massively. They have no idea what to plant, what to do. It's water guzzling ka baap. They've got huge amounts of water that they're pumping up, underground water they're pumping up and feeding to these plants. They've got the mushrooms, plastic mushrooms this size
I
that are
saw that.
actually speakers. So as you walking in the park, you've got
Yeah.
Bambaya music sort of charging you on. They've got what was Hitler's architect called? The spear. They're Albert Speer-like architecture leading you up to the top. I can't tell you how terrible it is. But Modi साहब ने उसको certificate दे दिया है. The president was visiting the next day, and the local people visiting there were very happy because it was green, but green in this really horrible way. So we have a long way to go as a culture to
Mm.
be able to just understand what ought to be. You know, it's very sad. It's very sad, and we are in a sense voices in the wilderness. Where most
Yeah.
people don't even see this.
Yeah. And in fact, when I read Somel's note about Bhuj, and I was thinking, I mean, just a few kilometers away is Chadwara Khal, where you can actually see the mix of what
Oh my
must have
God.
been over there and what could be. And it's just a pity. Um, yeah, that's just it's such a mess. And even cities, right? Pradeep, even our cities and the city planners, there seems to be a huge lack of imagination when it comes to planning cities. They seem to, at least in Bangalore, where I live, where Prem and I both live, they try to make it a Dubai or they try to make it a Singapore. Both of them are so bad, the choices. You end up with, something that's just such a miss.
No, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I mean, I don't know whether we need to blame the people who learn about urban planning and that sort of stuff. I know some very good guys actually, but they're not the guys who take the decisions.
Mm.
But yeah, the imagination is all skewed. You know, no, it's. I mean, it's a very sad topic.
Yeah.
What is the role of ERA in something like this or going forward? It's such a fantastic. Yesterday, I sat through an amazing talk by Abhi Vanak
Yeah.
about ONEs, open
Oh, it
natural
is. Yeah.
ecosystems,
Yeah.
which is just so important. And it's one of those soapboxes that I sit on, where it's all labeled wasteland and
Yeah.
just not what it is at all.
Yeah.
And those are targets for tree planting all the time. But
Yeah.
so, what is? I mean, you guys can be something so powerful in us moving forward towards.
Well, we wish we could be powerful, but at the moment we are not powerful. But we're a resource sharing community. We do things. For example, in early September, we're doing a workshop for journalists in Delhi
Mm, I saw that with
uh,
Monga Bay, right?
with Monga Bay
Mm.
to try and uh, tell them about what restoration really means, and what. So it's trying to make them restoration literate, and then if it works, we want to then do this in a number of other cities. So we'll go around a bit like a circus. We recently did, along with NCBS and NCF, we did a restoration course for probationers at the Indira Gandhi Academy for Forestry in Dehradun for probationers, which was a disaster, quite frankly.
Why?
Well, there are about 130 probationers from this year, and it was an elective course, and 18 of them only opted to do this. Others were doing other things, but they weren't at all interested. It was an elective. They were not being marked on it. There was nobody senior there. There was one lady probationer who just put her hands out and went to sleep at the very beginning, and didn't. I know at some point she raised her head and she cracked open a paperback and was reading it. So another guy in an orange shirt who was on his phone the whole time and showing stuff to his neighbor, and they literally paid no attention whatsoever. So I had a 2-hour session to start with, where I wasn't able to look at them a lot because I was looking at my stuff. But then after that, I sat and I watched them while Sridhar was talking about the work they were doing in the animal eyes. And then Anand was talking about how to monitor restoration site. And I was watching these, there were 18 people in the hall, and they didn't so much as lift their eyes to look at what was happening. And I'm thinking, my God, these guys are, they're people who've probably sat for the central service exams and not got into the IS and not got into the IPS. And this is their third choice. And they're saying, what the fuck, Arturo? They just weren't interested. And I guess that was an honest response. I'll give it to them. They were not pretending to be or excited about it, but it was very, very disheartening to see. I mean, in all the years that I've dealt with forest people, have occasionally come up with very interesting people. They are few and far between, but every now and again, some really interested people. Who are. But my God, this cohort was just so. It was so sad to see them. Not one person.
Yeah, you typically know people are not connecting by the questions they ask at the end of your
Mm.
presentation or your speech or whatever it is, right? And yeah, that should have told you a lot. But in a perfect world, what would ERA try to shift, Pradeep, in terms of mindset, in terms of practice? influencing state policy, public imagination, all of that?
I think everything. We would want to, for example, we're hoping to do a workshop with the Bhopal Forest Department.
Mm-hmm.
And what we hope will happen is that we will be able to work on a restoration site together. We're going to choose a small site, maybe no more than 4 or 5 hectares. We're going to say that, okay, we'll do one site that we guide with you and you guys implement, another site that you guys do it your way. And let's just watch them and see how they happen, you know. So, but before we do that, we're going to have a whole 4-day or 5-day course with them. So, yeah, we hope to influence the way the forest department works and thinks. We hope to influence government policy. We hope to show people what a mess Miyawakis are and what rubbish. Because a lot of municipal horticulture authorities have jumped onto the Miyawaki wagon and are following it. UP is leading the way, and so on. So yeah, we hope to make a difference. The way we operate is that we have created. So we have a steering committee of about 10 people. Very nice bunch of people, all from different parts of the country. We have one restoration networking sort of conference every year where a lot of people come together and there's talks and shows. And Arti and Prem, you should come. We're doing this
I
one
will.
in the Northeast this year.
I think I'll start coming after I start my own restoration stuff, which is hopefully sometime next year.
Yeah. And then we have these desks.
Mm-hmm.
So these desks all have specific functions and specialities. So you have a communications desk, and you have a communities desk, and you have a policy desk, and so on. And each of these desks is nested within an NGO, and they're funded by somebody or the other, either through CSR funds or whatever. So yeah, so we have a website, we have resources, we publish information about ecoregions, we publish stuff about native plants for each region, we tell them where the nurseries are. So it's really to create a bank of resources so that it becomes easier for anyone who is stepping out in this area to do things in the right way. And we have talks and seminars and stuff pretty much every week. It's like an advocacy thing.
The whole idea being to create some kind of restoration culture in the country. So, if you could design or redesign how, particularly urban India, thinks of green spaces, how would you do that?
I've always felt that if you can demonstrate, if you can create a little space that demonstrates how the ideal kind of greening for that particular space, what it's like, it becomes, you can then amplify that message to any extent. I used to think that. But for example, now in Jodhpur, we created this little garden. It's, I don't know, it's probably 1/30th of an acre in size at our visitor center, And it's for me, it's an example of what you can do in an entirely rocky site, just using desert plants that require barely any support. And people have come and looked at it, other horticulturists and all. But then I went to Jaipur a few years later and I saw what they did when they shifted the zoo out to what they call the biological park in the Aravalis. And you have these large cages and then you have little gardens between the cages. And they're just like municipal gardens, and they're in the Aravali hills. And so there's also this question of people, even though you've created something that you can show people what a good piece of native plant gardening is like, it doesn't get picked up. Kishan Bagh in Jaipur which we started creating in 2016, is in a city, and it functions like a city park, and we get a lot of people coming to it. But yeah, so in theory, it would be lovely to demonstrate stuff. I'd love to do something in Delhi that actually shows people what you could do, where you don't have to have a colonial style lawn, where you don't have to do things in a particular style. At the same time, it's really hard to work with government. So if government controls all the parks and all the areas, it's a really dangerous thing. I mean, with Kishan Bagh, we've actually had to walk out and say, keep it, and the park's going to go. There was a notice 3 weeks after we left to say that the Rajasthan government has announced that they're going to give the park to the army to make a model park. So I'm imagining little triangular bricks painted with Geru, replacing what we've done in Kishan Bagh. It's a very dismal scene, Prem. There's no question about it. But I've just had the news 3 days ago that I'm being given a space in a privately owned, close to where I live in central Delhi, that we're going to create into a performance space with a garden and a small amphitheater.
Mhm.
And it's not with government, and it's going to be free. It's going to be free to attend performances and free for performers to actually hire the space.
Nice.
And I'm just thrilled about it because I think it could actually be something completely game changing, in a city like Delhi. So me and a lot of my friends in the ERA are thinking we're going to have fun just doing this little garden. It's 7,000 square feet, so it's really small, but it also makes it very doable.
Right.
And, so, I mean, all you can really hope to do is show people stuff. If you can't show it to them on the ground, you show them pictures. If you can't show them pictures, you do talks. Have Arati put up a video.
Hmm.
Hmm.
It's typically, I mean, most of the people who've come on our podcast, we've asked them a question, which in this case would be: is citizen restoring something that, say, ordinary people like us can do? Or does it take your kind of involvement,
You have to be as
knowledge?
clever as I am. If you're not as clever as I am, then you can't do it.
Absolutely.
It's true, by the way.
No, I'm kidding.
Oh,
I'm
no.
kidding. I'm kidding. Yeah, I mean, this is the assumption behind ERA that anyone can do it as long as you are willing to understand the process and,
Mhm.
and work with the right tools. Yeah. So I I actually help and advise a lot of people who come to me, for free. It's not a consultancy. Like, you say, look, this is how you can go about doing. Yeah, I do believe anyone can do it. I believe anyone can do it. A lot of the people, so, these 10 or 12 people who are part of this, so this park group that goes around in Delhi, we call ourselves the grasshoppers. A lot of the grasshoppers are people who have not done any restoration work, but are looking in with great interest and have all started doing things on a small scale, even if it's only in their little terrace gardens. But I mean, two of them have started projects of their own now. And yeah, I think it's something anyone could do. I
Mm.
do really believe that.
Right. Arti?
Nothing, no other questions at this point. I mean, I have a lot of questions, but we
Yes.
could go on and on. And I want to be mindful of Pradeep's time. We've taken a lot of his time, actually, an hour and a half
I have
now.
to be somewhere at 7 o'clock, so just be.
Right.
Is there any interesting thing that you've been reading that you can suggest for our listeners and for us?
I just read Robert uh,
McFarlane's?
McFarlane,
McFarlane's Is the River
The
Alive?
River Alive,
Still
yeah.
reading that. I'm on the Canadian section, but
Mm,
I loved his Chennai bit, and
yes.
you know, I mean, he writes beautifully. He
Hmm.
writes beautifully, sometimes almost too beautifully. I
Mhm.
That is something I did feel
Yeah.
at some point, that. But wow, what a book, what a guy,
Mm.
amazing fellow. Yuvan, I mean, I was very struck by Yuvan's own book, the intertitle, I read it about a year and a half ago, and I must have bought about 20 copies and distributed them freely to people, but
You and I both. Yeah.
just
He
amazing.
was an earlier guest on this
Yeah.
podcast,
We had him.
actually. One
Mm,
was
You've
a
had him
guest
on
on,
this podcast,
yeah.
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 He's a really amazing guy, and such a beautiful new perspective on things.
Mm,
It's
Yeah.
really wonderful, and he's so articulate.
yes. Indeed.
Mm.
That's great.
One of the things about the kind of guests we've had on the podcast is we take up an hour and a half of their time and then realize that we have enough questions for the next 3 hours. So we leave it with, we want you back after a decent interval. But yeah.
And maybe we can have a whole bunch of ERA people
Yeah,
uh, put
Yeah.
together and kind of have a panel and discuss the various
absolutely.
issues,
Yeah.
with
Some
different
very, very
issues.
nice people in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We'd love to do that.
yeah. That's great. Thank you so much
Okay,
for your
you're
time.
welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you
Thank
so
you, Pradeep. So that was Pradip Kishen. And this whole talk was about what does it mean to restore. What Pradeep was nudging us to reconsider is not just what we plant, but why and where, and whether we've asked the land what it needs. His point is that restoration isn't a spreadsheet of tree counts, it's an act of ecological listening, of matching species to place, resisting quick fixes, staying long enough to watch something take root and grow. So we talked about the the quiet revolution of native plants. We discussed the problem with top-down afforestation drives and the promise of networks like the Ecological Restoration Alliance that Pradeep is a part of. And through it all, Arti, one thing comes out very clearly, which is that restoration is not a project, it's a relationship, right?
Yes, absolutely. And it reminds me of that Aldo Leopold quote where he says that um, if we look at land as a resource, then, and I'm just paraphrasing here, it doesn't work as well as if you look at land as a community
Right.
that we belong to. Then it makes much more sense. And the other thing that struck me was in all of Pradeep's talking, there was a sense of how slow and deliberate uh, restoration necessarily is. And for it to be good, for it to be successful, you need to have that kind of patience. It's not a quick fix. It's not a quick tree planting, quick do and forget kind of thing and move on kind of thing. And it makes me wonder whether CSR, which goes from quarter to quarter and stuff like that, if there isn't a sustained effort, whether that is suited at all for restoration, which is what is the need of the hour. Um,
Yeah.
right? And that anything worth doing seems to be necessarily uh, do we need to do it slow.
Right. We've talked about that in the last episode with respect to journalism and
Hmm.
now with respect to environmental restoration and all of that. Uh, so, folks, that's it from us for this week, or this fortnight rather, and we'll be back 2 weeks from now with the next episode of From the Marginlands. Until then, adios.
And make sure you hit the subscribe button so that you have it when we drop new episodes. You can follow us on Instagram at Form the Marginlands as well. And make sure you write into us marginlands@gmail.com with any kind of feedback, suggestions, guests you might like to hear from, or anything that you might like to say at all. Thank you so much
And
for listening.
Arti, before you go, uh, you just mentioned writing to us at Marginlands, right?
Mhm.
There's this mail. You were traveling in the US at the time when this landed up, and so I responded on my own. I just wanted to read it out because, I mean, we keep talking of all sorts of gloom and doom scenarios, and at the same time, there are these brief moments when something gives you hope, and this mail was one of those.
Hmm.
Uh, so here it is. It's by Payal. She says, I'm a 20-year-old geography student currently living in Delhi. Yesterday, I finished reading your book, that would be yours, your book, Marginlands, and I couldn't process the magnanimity for language, loss, and landscapes. So I started rereading it today alongside Finding Fish by Samant Subramanian. I had some really basic questions to ask. I finished reading Marginlands late at night and waited anxiously to wake up next day and take out my notebook for understanding my vicinity. Our landlord's garden doesn't have a lot of native plant species, but it does manage to attract a common tailor bird, a purple sunbird, and a red-whiskered bulbul. Red-whiskered bulbuls are my personal favorites for just the way their black crest bobs along with its head.
Hmm.
I then took a walk in an urban park and found a rufous
Tree pie.
tree pie,
Hmm.
and maybe a white-browned wagtail, though I'm not sure.
Mm.
But at the center of it all, I'm overwhelmed with confusion. How do I process all the bird sounds around me? How do I observe bees around me? Are there even any solitary bees present in this place? How do I engage with my landscape? I also then went back and listened to this episode with Yuvan Aves, where he asked us to directly engage. So, as a student, I want to know how to be closer to people and landscapes that we live in. I presume it's easier to ask for lessons from people you've mentioned in Margin Lands when you're a journalist. But as a normal person, the process to understand the traces or origin of things that we use or eat is often quite vague. Can you suggest some ways of tackling these challenges? I thought it was such a lovely, thoughtful, considered note. And I wonder how many such people there are out there, right? I mean, who have the desire and who are looking for ways and means. And maybe we need to do a podcast on this. We did part of it. But yeah, what did you think?
Oh, lovely. And I think she's already on her way,
Yeah,
because what else is it than if you start looking and observing and noticing, things around you, including your little bulbul, which will wake you up. There is a bulbul that comes outside my window every day at 5:45 and
yeah,
starts singing.
yeah,
And so that is the beginning. And I think, Payal, you're well on your way to doing all of this, and it's a learning process for all of us. None of us have it down pat, so you're on your way.
yeah.
Sorry.
Coincidentally, that's pretty much what I told her, besides a few practical things like, you know, Merlin bird ID to record and identify things like that. But yeah,
Yeah,
thank you
that's
so
great.
much,
And
Pyle.
I will,
And
yeah, and I will write to Payal as well.
right.
Thank you. And please, people, please do write, and that's the way we know, what resonated and what we can do better at.
Yeah.
All right. See you then in 2 weeks. Take care. Stay safe.
Bye bye.